I think it's time for my May wrap up. So May is over and I didn't have as good of a reading month as I hoped I would. I kind of started off pretty strong and then it just didn't happen for me. But all the books I ended up reading in May are ones that I really enjoyed, so I still count this reading month as a success. It's not that big of a deal if I don't read like a certain amount of books every month, but hey, I like to put pressure on myself. So here I have my reading journal. I do it on my iPad and it's super convenient. If you guys want me to do a video about my reading journal and how I do it on my iPad, I will totally do it. Just let me know down below in the comments. Okay, so the first book that I read in the month of May is an ARC, and that is The Kingdom of Back. And I gave that book a 5 out of 5 stars, and it's about the Mozart siblings, and basically it mainly focuses on Nannerl, the older sister, and it really tells her story and what it might have been like from her perspective, because most of history leaves out the fact that Mozart actually did have an older sister and that she was just as talented as he was. And it was really exciting getting to see their sibling dynamic. I love family dynamics in books, especially books that are either historical or fantasy or both. I just love family dynamics. I think they're so interesting, and I love to see the way that siblings interact with each other. And I especially love when there's an older sister and a younger brother, because I can relate to that. I also really love the author's note at the end of the book talking about some of the historical elements that Marie Lu added into this book. I thought it was super intriguing that the Kingdom of Back was like an actual thing that the Mozart siblings made up between each other just to keep themselves busy on the road through Europe. And so I think that was super intriguing, and I love that she added that into the narrative. I just found this book to be so lush. It was exactly what I was looking for, and I love that it was historical fantasy. That's one of my favorite subgenres, and it just really worked for me as a whole book. And even though it's a standalone, it definitely was able to hold itself as a standalone, and it didn't really need like other books to accompany it. And I don't know, I just really loved it. If you're interested in history, if you're interested in music, if you like fantasy, I think you would really like this book. The next book was a reread, and that is Wither by Lauren De Stefano, and I gave that a 5 out of 5 stars. So I don't typically reread books very often, but when I find myself in a slump, I do like to reread books that I'm like familiar with, that I really love, that have like a special place in my heart, and Wither is definitely that book for me. It's a dystopian that I read back in high school, and basically it's kind of like a young adult version of The Handmaid's Tale. It has a similar premise where it's set in a dystopian world and women are taken to be mothers and wives and things like that. So it's similar but a little bit different than Handmaid's Tale, because in Wither it's a lot more about like the fact that women die at I think around 20 and then men die at 25, so there's that added aspect of it as well. And where in The Handmaid's Tale there's already the wife, and then there's like the handmaid that has to like do the whole pregnancy thing. In Wither it's more like sister wives, and you know, there is like the first wife and you know whatever, but it's just a little different than The Handmaid's Tale, I guess. But like I said, I really loved this book when I was in high school, and I was really nervous to kind of revisit it as an older person, like at 25, being like, will I like this still? And I ended up really liking it, and it wasn't as bad as I thought it was gonna be. Like for some reason I just thought like, oh, the writing's not gonna be as good, I'm not gonna be as emotional, like, you know, certain things aren't going to hit me as hard. And no, I was so emotional reading this book. I cried so much. I cried actually probably more than I did when I first read it, so I feel like that's kind of like a good thing for me. When I cry during a book, that means I totally love it. Well, for the most part. There are sometimes when I do cry at books and I don't love it, but I would say like 95% of the time if I cry, it means it's like a 5-star book. The next book is actually a poetry collection, and it's called Swim by Emily Burns. I gave that a 4 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed it. There's not much to say about it. I felt like it was very well done. I really liked all of the poems. I thought that they all worked really well together, and the theming was like very consistent throughout the entire poetry collection. And overall, it's just some really good modern poetry. I did like the fact that there were a lot more long form poems. I feel like a lot of times in modern poetry, long form poems kind of go to the wayside, but I personally really love long long form poems. I love when it's like more than just like 1 or 2 stanzas. So that really worked for me as well. And overall, it was just a really good poetry collection. It wasn't my favorite, but it definitely wasn't the worst. So it's a pretty solid 4 stars. I really enjoyed it and I would totally recommend it. Not my favorite. And the last book that I read for the month of May was this Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. And that took me a little while to figure out because I could not remember the title for a second, sorry. And I also gave that book a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I don't want to talk too much about it, mainly because I do want to kind of give it its own dedicated review, but overall, really enjoyed it. I listened to the audiobook and Santino Fontana is amazing. He's incredible. I fall in love with him more and more every day. So it was definitely a treat to get to listen to him narrate this audiobook. I just love Santino Fontana. And if you don't know who he is the voice of Prince Hans in Frozen, and he is also Greg in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. So we love him. He's also Prince Topher in Cinderella on Broadway, like the original one on Broadway. Not, I guess not the original, but you know what I mean. The one that's on Spotify, if you go on there, it's there. He was with Laura Osnes, so so he's like just iconic to me. I love him so much. And then I also had 2 unfinished books that I started in May, but then I'm going to finish in June. And the first one is Wasted Words by Stacey Hart, and that is an Emma by Jane Austen retelling, and I am loving it so much. It's so cute, so nerdy. There's also some sports kind of sprinkled in there because one of the main characters is an ex-football player. He got hurt, could not play football anymore, so he's kind of trying to find his footing, trying to figure out what he's going to do, and he ends up becoming the roommate to the other main character, and she works at this really cool like half bookstore, half comic book store, half bar sort of situation, and it's so cool. It's like the place of my dreams. I'm like, I want to go there. And they like are very opposite, but they kind of attract. You know the story of Emma. It's basically Clueless, and I'm really loving it so much. I'm about halfway through. I'm reading it on my Kindle. I think it's free on Amazon, so if you are interested in it, check it out. It's really good. I'm really enjoying all the romance. I really like the characters. I think it's very well written. So I mean, we'll see how I end up liking it in my June wrap up. And then the other book that I started in May but actually ended up finishing in June was A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I loved it. I loved it so much. I cannot believe that people don't hype this book up because it's perfect. It's literally everything that book Twitter, booktube, the book community in general loves. And it's so well done. I love the writing. I love the characters so much. I'm reading the second book currently, and Alice is just a bad bitch. I love her so much. She is so realistically a teenager, and whenever I'm listening to these books, I'm just like, this, I can relate to this. This was my mom. My mom was also super overprotective and like, you know, not really overbearing, but just like super protective. And so is Alice's mom. She wants to know like where she's at, who she's with, stuff like that. I grew up the same way as a teenager. I had to tell my mom exactly where I was, who I was with, all this stuff, so I can relate to Alice. And I feel like people are always like asking for fantasy books or like urban fantasy books that have more quote-unquote realistic parents who are like actually involved in their kids' lives and like want to know what's happening, and this is it. A Blade So Black. It's amazing. It's basically like an Alice in Wonderland retelling. The author compares it to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but I've never seen Buffy the Vampire Slayer, so I'm gonna say it's kind of like Kim Possible, but with magic and with like Alice in Wonderland themes and like little tidbits. Okay, so quickly to go through my June TBR, I also have that on my reading journal. So the first book that I'm reading is one I'm reading currently, and it's on my iPad. It's called Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race, and this is by Rennie Odo Lodge, and I am loving it. It's amazing. It's literally one of the best nonfiction books about race I've ever read. It's incredible. I feel like this should have been taught in schools. I don't know why it wasn't. I don't know why it wasn't brought up in my British Lit class, because it does talk a lot about racism in England, and I think that it's done so well. And like, there's so many topics in that book that I'm just like, that just really resonate and just are so real. I don't know how to explain it. It's just amazing. I feel like I'll have better thoughts once I finish it, and you'll hear about it in like either a vlog or my June wrap up, but I 100% recommend it. Go read it. It's just absolutely amazing. The next book I want to read is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I'm really hoping I get to read it because I love Elizabeth Acevedo's books, and I especially love her books on audiobook. Like, her audiobooks are the best audiobooks I've ever read, and I just love her writing so much. There's something about it that just makes it feel so realistic, that just makes it get really deep inside you, and it's so different than any of the books I typically read. And I don't know, I just love her. I love her books so much, and I'm really excited for this one as well, and I think I'm really going to enjoy it. The next book I want to read is Solo by Kwame Alexander, and I don't know too much about what this book is about. I'm pretty sure it's about music, and as you guys know, I've been trying to read a lot of books that are centered around music, mainly because I want to do a music book recommendations video. I guess does that make sense? But basically I want to be able to recommend some really good books that are centered around music, and I'm pretty sure this is one of them, and I'm very excited to read it. And then the next book that I have on my TBR is Queenie by Candice Carty Williams, and I got that book just very recently at Target, and I'm so excited to read this book because it's about a 25-year-old. It seems like she's kind of having a bit of a quarter life crisis, and you know, as a fellow 25-year-old, I always feel like I'm having a quarter life crisis, so I'm hoping I can relate to this book a little bit and see myself in it, because I don't really read a lot of books that are written about 25-year-olds, and I was super excited to find this book at Target. And then the last book that I have on my TBR is another one that I'm currently in the middle of, and it is this book, A River of Royal Blood by Amanda Joy, and I am loving it so much. It has so many things that I love about fantasy. It has like these different creatures, it has fae, it has just a bunch of different kind of like magical people. It kind of reminds me a bit of Frozen if Anna and Elsa had to fight to the death, and if Elsa was the younger sister and Anna was the older sister, and it's just so good. I'm loving it so much. I cannot believe that people don't hype this book up more. I know that Olivia from Olivia Reads a Latte likes this book, so of course I trust her judgment, and I don't know, I'm really liking it. I am currently 85 pages into it, so I'm right there. For some reason, I did expect this book to be dual perspectives, but it's not. So that's like my only drawback to the book, like my only like minor thing. I wish it was dual perspectives because I really want to hear from her sister's perspective, but we're only getting from Ava's perspective, or Eva. I'm not really sure how to pronounce it, Ava or Eva. And I don't know, I'm really liking it. I'm liking her as a character. She seems a little unsure and maybe a little afraid of her powers, which I think is super interesting. I feel like a lot of times in YA fantasy, characters are just like immediately strong and powerful within their magic, but I think it's really interesting when a character isn't super confident in their magic, and that's this. Also, family dynamics. Like, I really love family dynamics, especially when they're dysfunctional family dynamics. Like, that is my favorite thing. And this has dysfunction written all over it. So I'm super excited to see where this goes. Alright, so that is it for my May wrap up and my June TBR. I hope you guys like this video. Let me know down below in the comments what books that you read in May and what books you're looking forward to for June. And please go ahead and follow me on Instagram, Twitter, and Goodreads, and I will see you all in my next video. Bye!
Ooh, I thought it'd be me and you.